And we're back. Thank you guys for tuning in, as always, to Another World Audiobooks, your favorite podcast for awesome, high-quality, free audiobooks. And thank you so much for sharing the podcast. Thank you to our patrons. I'm just so grateful to be able to put this out there and that there are people that enjoy listening to it. And if that's you, thank you. And I really, really want to say, if you do want to support the podcast, make sure to share the podcast, but also check out Patreon. I know it's kind of weird, signing up for something like that potentially, but I do try to make it worth your while with lots of perks and awesome stuff that you get if you sign up to be a patron. So go check that out, anotherworldaudiobooks.com. There are some really awesome stuff coming down the pike for patrons, and I'll be letting you know about those as they come along. So thanks guys for listening, and without further ado, let's jump into the next couple chapters of Around the World in 80 Days. Chapter 24, during which Mr. Fogg and party crossed the Pacific Ocean. What happened when the pilot boat came in sight of Shanghai will be easily guessed. The signals made by the Tonkadeer had been seen by the captain of the Yokohama steamer, who, espying the flag at half-mast, had directed his course towards the little craft. Phileas Fogg, after paying the stipulated price for his passage to John Bunsby, and rewarding that worthy with the additional sum of £550, ascended the steamer with Aouda and Fix, and they started at once for Nagasaki and Yokohama. They reached their destination on the morning of the 14th of November. Phileas Fogg lost no time in going on board the Carnatic, where he learned, to Aouda's great delight, and perhaps to his own, though he betrayed no emotion, that Passepartout, a Frenchman, had really arrived on her the day before. The San Francisco steamer was announced to leave that very evening, and it became necessary to find Passepartout, if possible, without delay. Mr. Fogg applied in vain to the French and English consuls, and after wandering through the streets a long time, began to despair of finding his missing servant. Chance, or perhaps a kind of presentiment, at last led him into the Honourable Mr. Battlecar's theatre. He certainly would not have recognized Passepartout in the eccentric mountebank's costume, but the latter, lying on his back, perceived his master in the gallery. He could not help starting, which so changed the position of his nose as to bring the pyramid pell-mell upon the stage. All this Passepartout learned from Aouda, who recounted to him what had taken place on the voyage from Hong Kong to Shanghai on the Tonkadeer, in the company of one Mr. Fix. Passepartout did not change countenance on hearing this name. He thought that the time had not yet arrived to divulge to his master what had taken place between the detective and himself, and in the account he gave of his absence, he simply excused himself for having been overtaken by drunkenness in smoking opium at a tavern in Hong Kong. Mr. Fogg heard this narrative coldly, without a word, and then furnished his man with funds necessary to obtain clothing more in harmony with his position. Within an hour, the Frenchman had cut off his nose and parted with his wings, and retained nothing about him which recalled the sectary of the god Tingu. The steamer, which was about to depart from Yokohama to San Francisco, belonged to the Pacific Mail Steamship Company, and was named the General Grant. She was a large paddle-wheel steamer of 2,500 tons, well-equipped and very fast. The massive walking beam rose and fell above the deck. At one end a piston rod worked up and down, and at the other was a connecting rod which, in changing the rectilinear motion to a circular one, was directly connected with the shaft of the paddles. The General Grant was rigged with 3 masts, giving a large capacity for sails, and thus materially aiding the steam power. By making 12 miles an hour, she would cross the ocean in 21 days. Phileas Fogg was therefore justified in hoping that he would reach San Francisco by the 2nd of December, New York by the 11th, and London on the 20th, thus gaining several hours on the fatal date of the 21st of December. There was a full complement of passengers on board, among them English, many Americans, a large number of coolies on their way to California, and several East Indian officers who were spending their vacation in making the tour of the world. Nothing of moment happened on the voyage. The steamer, sustained on its large paddles, rolled but little, and the Pacific almost justified its name. Mr. Fogg was as calm and taciturn as ever. His young companion felt herself more and more attached to him by other ties than gratitude. His silent but generous nature impressed her more than she thought, and it was almost unconsciously that she yielded to emotions which did not seem to have the least effect upon her protector. Aouda took the keenest interest in his plans, and became impatient at any incident which seemed likely to retard his journey. She often chatted with Passepartout, who did not fail to perceive the state of the lady's heart, and, being the most faithful of domestics, he never exhausted his eulogies of Phileas Fogg's honesty, generosity, and devotion. He took pains to calm Aouda's doubts of a successful termination of the journey, telling her that the most difficult part of it had passed, that now they were beyond the fantastic countries of Japan and China, and were fairly on their way to civilized places again. A railway train from San Francisco to New York, and a transatlantic steamer from New York to Liverpool, would doubtless bring them to the end of this impossible journey round the world within the period agreed upon. On the 9th day after leaving Yokohama, Phileas Fogg had traversed exactly 1/2 of the terrestrial globe. The General Grant passed, on the 23rd of November, the 180th meridian, and was at the very antipodes of London. Mr. Fogg had, it is true, exhausted 52 of the 80 days in which he was to complete the tour, and there were only 28 left. But though he was only halfway by the difference of meridians, he had really gone over 2/3 of the whole journey. For he had been obliged to make long circuits from London to Aden, from Aden to Bombay, from Calcutta to Singapore, and from Singapore to Yokohama. Could he have followed without deviation the 50th parallel, which is that of London, the whole distance would have been about 12,000 miles, whereas he would be forced, by the irregular methods of locomotion, to traverse 26,000, of which he had, on the 23rd of November, accomplished 17,500, and now the course was a straight one, and Fix was no longer there to put obstacles in his way. It happened also on the 23rd of November that Passepartout made a joyful discovery. It will be remembered that the obstinate fellow had insisted on keeping his famous family watch at London time, and on regarding that of the countries he had passed through as quite false and unreliable. Now, on this day, though he had not changed the hands, he found that his watch exactly agreed with the ship's chronometer. His triumph was hilarious. He would have liked to know what Fix would say if he were aboard. "That rogue told me a lot of stories," repeated Passepartout, "about the meridian, the sun, and the moon. Moon indeed. Moonshine more likely. If one listened to that sort of people, a pretty sort of time one would keep. I was sure that the sun would someday regulate itself by my watch." Passepartout was ignorant that, if the face of his watch had been divided into 24 hours, like the Italian clocks, he would have no reason for exultation, for the hands of his watch would then, instead of as now indicating 9 o'clock in the morning, indicate 9 o'clock in the evening. That is, the 21st hour after midnight, precisely the difference between London time and that of the 180th meridian. But if Fix had been able to explain this purely physical effect, Passepartout would not have admitted, even if he had comprehended it. Moreover, if the detective had been on board at that moment, Passepartout would have joined issue with him on a quite different subject, and in an entirely different manner. Where was Fix at that moment? He was actually on board the General Grant. On reaching Yokohama, the detective, leaving Mr. Fogg, whom he expected to meet again during the day, had repaired at once to the English consulate, where he at last found the warrant of arrest. It had followed him from Bombay, and had come by the Carnatic, on which steamer he himself was supposed to be. Fix's disappointment may be imagined when he reflected that the warrant was now useless. Mr. Fogg had left English ground, and it was now necessary to procure his extradition. "Well," thought Fix, after a moment of anger, "my warrant is not good here, but it will be in England. The rogue evidently intends to return to his own country, thinking he has thrown the police off his track. Good. I will follow him across the Atlantic. As for the money, heaven grant there may be some left, but the fellow has already spent in travelling, rewards, trials, bail, elephants, and all sorts of charges, more than £5,000. Yet, after all, the bank is rich." His course decided on, he went on board the General Grant, and was there when Mr. Fogg and Aouda arrived. To his utter amazement, he recognized Passepartout despite his theatrical disguise. He quickly concealed himself in his cabin to avoid an awkward explanation, and hoped, thanks to the number of passengers, to remain unperceived by Mr. Fogg's servant. On that very day, however, he met Passepartout face to face on the forward deck. The latter, without a word, made a rush for him, grasped him by the throat, and, much to the amusement of a group of Americans, who immediately began to bet on him, administered to the detective a perfect volley of blows, which proved the great superiority of French over English pugilistic skill. When Passepartout had finished, he found himself relieved and comforted. Fix got up in a somewhat rumpled condition, and, looking at his adversary, coldly said, "Have you done?" "For this time, yes." "Then let me have a word with you. But in your master's interests." Passepartout seemed to be vanquished by Fix's coolness, for he quietly followed him, and they sat down aside from the rest of the passengers. "You have given me a thrashing," said Fix. "Good, I expected it. Now, listen to me. Up to this time I have been Mr. Fogg's adversary. I am now in his game." "Aha!" cried Passepartout. "You are convinced he is an honest man?" "No," replied Fix coldly. "I think him a rascal. Shh, don't budge, and let me speak. As long as Mr. Fogg was on English ground, it was for my interest to detain him there until my warrant of arrest arrived. I did everything I could to keep him back. I sent the Bombay police after him. I got you intoxicated at Hong Kong. I separated you from him, and I made him miss the Yokohama steamer." Passepartout listened with closed fists. "Now," resumed Fix, "Mr. Fogg seems to be going back to England. Well, I will follow him there. But hereafter I will do as much to keep obstacles out of his way as I've done up to this time to put them in his path. I've changed my game, you see, and simply because it was for my interest to change it. Your interest is the same as mine, for it is only in England that you will ascertain whether you are in the service of a criminal or an honest man." Passepartout listened very attentively to Fix, and was convinced that he spoke with entire good faith. "Are we friends?" asked the detective. "Friends? No," replied Passepartout, "but allies, perhaps. At the least sign of treason, however, I'll twist your neck for you." "Agreed," said the detective quietly. 11 days later, on the 3rd of December, the General Grant entered the bay of the Golden Gate and reached San Francisco. Mr. Fogg had neither gained nor lost a single day. Chapter 25, in which a slight glimpse is had of San Francisco. It was 7 in the morning when Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Passepartout set foot upon the American continent, if this name can be given to the floating quay upon which they disembarked. These quays, rising and falling with the tide, thus facilitate the loading and unloading of vessels. Alongside them were clippers of all sizes, steamers of all nationalities, and the steamboats, with several decks rising one above the other, which ply on the Sacramento and its tributaries. There were also heaped up the products of a commerce which extends to Mexico, Chile, Peru, Brazil, Europe, Asia, and all the Pacific islands. Passepartout, in his joy on reaching at last the American continent, thought he would manifest it by executing a perilous vault in fine style, but, tumbling upon some worm-eaten planks, he fell through them. Put out of countenance by the manner in which he thus set foot upon the New World, he uttered a loud cry, which so frightened the innumerable cormorants and pelicans that are always perched upon these movable quays that they flew noisily away. Mr. Fogg, on reaching shore, proceeded to find out at what hour the first train left for New York, and learned that this was at 6 p.m. He had, therefore, an entire day to spend in the Californian capital. Taking a carriage at a charge of $3, he and Aouda entered it, while Passepartout mounted the box beside the driver, and they set out for the International Hotel. From his exalted position, Passepartout observed with much curiosity the wide streets, the low, evenly ranged houses, the Anglo-Saxon Gothic churches, the great docks, the palatial wooden and brick warehouses, the numerous conveyances, omnibuses, horse-cars, and upon the sidewalks not only Americans and Europeans, but Chinese and Indians. Passepartout was surprised at all he saw. San Francisco was no longer the legendary city of 1849, a city of banditti, assassins, and incendiaries, who had flocked hither in crowds in pursuit of plunder. a paradise of outlaws, where they gambled with gold dust, a revolver in one hand and a bowie knife in the other. It was now a great commercial emporium. The lofty tower of its city hall overlooked the entire panorama of the streets and avenues which cut each other at right angles, and in the midst of which appeared pleasant verdant squares, while beyond appeared the Chinese quarter, seemingly imported from the Celestial Empire in a toy box. Sombreros and red shirts and plumed Indians were rarely to be seen, but there were silk hats and black coats everywhere worn by a multitude of nervously active, gentlemanly-looking men. Some of the streets, especially Montgomery Street, which is to San Francisco what Regent Street is to London, the Boulevard des Italiens to Paris, and Broadway to New York, were lined with splendid and spacious stores, which exposed in their windows the products of the entire world. When Passepartout reached the International Hotel, it did not seem to him as if he had left England at all. The ground floor of the hotel was occupied by a large bar, a sort of restaurant freely open to all passers-by, who might partake of dried beef, oyster soup, biscuits and cheese, without taking out their purses. Payment was made only for the ale, porter, or sherry which was drunk. This seemed very American to Passepartout. The hotel refreshment rooms were comfortable, and Mr. Fogg and Aouda, installing themselves at the table, were abundantly served on diminutive plates by negroes of darkest hue. After breakfast, Mr. Fogg, accompanied by Aouda, started for the English consulate to have his passport visaed. As he was going out, he met Passepartout, who asked him if it would not be well, before taking the train, to purchase some dozens of Enfield rifles and Colt's revolvers. He had been listening to stories of attacks upon the trains by the Sioux and Pawnees. Mr. Fogg thought it a useless precaution, but told him to do as he thought best, and went on to the consulate. He had not proceeded 200 steps, however, when, by the greatest chance in the world, he met Fix. The detective seemed wholly taken by surprise. What? Had Mr. Fogg and himself crossed the Pacific together, and not met on the steamer? At least Fix felt honoured to behold once more the gentleman to whom he owed so much, and, as his business recalled him to Europe, he should be delighted to continue the journey in such pleasant company. Mr. Fogg replied that the honour would be his, and the detective, who was determined not to lose sight of him, begged permission to accompany them in their walk about San Francisco, a request which Mr. Fogg readily granted. They soon found themselves in Montgomery Street, where a great crowd was collected. The sidewalks, street, horse-car rails, the shop doors, the windows of the houses, and even the roofs were full of people. Men were going about carrying large posters, and flags and streamers were floating in the wind, while loud cries were heard on every hand. "Hurrah for Cammerfield! Hurrah for Mandyboy!" It was a political meeting, at least so Fix conjectured, who said to Mr. Fogg, "Perhaps we had better not mingle with the crowd. There may be danger in it." "Yes," returned Mr. Fogg, "and blows, even if they are political, are still blows." Fix smiled at this remark, and in order to be able to see without being jostled about, the party took up a position on the top of a flight of steps situated at the upper end of Montgomery Street. Opposite them, on the other side of the street, between a coal wharf and a petroleum warehouse, a large platform had been erected in the open air, towards which the current of the crowd seemed to be directed. For what purpose was this meeting? What was the occasion of this excited assemblage? Phileas Fogg could not imagine. Was it to nominate some high official, a governor or member of Congress? It was not improbable, so agitated was the multitude before them. Just at this moment there was an unusual stir in the human mass. All the hands were raised in the air. Some, tightly closed, seemed to disappear suddenly in the midst of the cries, an energetic way, no doubt, of casting a vote. The crowd swayed back, the banners and flags wavered, disappeared an instant, then reappeared in tatters. The undulations of the human surge reached the steps, while all the heads floundered on the surface like a sea agitated by a squall. Many of the black hats disappeared, and the greater part of the crowd seemed to have diminished in height. "It is evidently a meeting," said Fix, "and its object must be an exciting one. I should not wonder if it were about the Alabama, despite the fact that that question is settled." "Perhaps," replied Fogg simply. "At least there are two champions in presence of each other, the Honourable Mr. Cammerfield and the Honourable Mr. Mandyboy." Aouda, leaning upon Mr. Fogg's arm, observed the tumultuous scene with surprise, while Fix asked a man near him what the cause of it all was. Before the man could reply, a fresh agitation arose. Hurrahs and excited shouts were heard. The staffs of the banners began to be used as offensive weapons. The fists flew about in every direction. Thumps were exchanged from the tops of the carriages and omnibuses which had been blocked up in the crowd. Boots and shoes went whirling through the air, and Mr. Fogg thought he even heard the crack of revolvers mingling in the din. The rout approached the stairway and flowed over the lower step. One of the parties had evidently been repulsed, but the mere lookers-on could not tell whether Mandyboy or Cammerfield had gained the upper hand. "It will be prudent for us to retire," said Fix, who was anxious that Mr. Fogg should not receive any injury, at least until they got back to London. "If there is any question about England in all this, and we were recognised, I fear it would go hard with us." "An English subject," began Mr. Fogg. He did not finish his sentence, for a terrific hubbub now arose on the terrace behind the flight of steps where they stood, and there were frantic shouts of "Hurrah for Mandyboy! Hip hip hurrah!" It was a band of voters coming to the rescue of their allies and taking the Cammerfield forces in flank. Mr. Fogg, Aouda, and Fix found themselves between two fires. It was too late to escape. The torrent of men, armed with loaded canes and sticks, was irresistible. Phileas Fogg and Fix were roughly hustled in their attempts to protect their fair companion. The former, as cool as ever, tried to defend himself with the weapons which nature had placed at the end of every Englishman's arm, but in vain. A big brawny fellow with a red beard, flushed face, and broad shoulders, who seemed to be the chief of the band, raised his clenched fist to strike Mr. Fogg, whom he would have given a crushing blow, had not Fix rushed in and received it in his stead. An enormous bruise immediately made its appearance upon the detective's silk hat, which was completely smashed in. "Yankee!" exclaimed Mr. Fogg, darting a contemptuous look at the ruffian. "Englishman," returned the other. "We will meet again." "When you please." "What is your name?" "Phileas Fogg. And yours?" "Colonel Stamp Proctor." The human tide now swept by, after overturning Fix, who speedily got upon his feet again, though with tattered clothes. Happily, he was not seriously hurt. His travelling overcoat was divided into two unequal parts, and his trousers resembled those of certain Indians, which fit less compactly than they are easy to put on. Aouda had escaped unharmed, and Fix also bore marks of the fray in his black and blue bruise. "Thanks," said Mr. Fogg to the detective as soon as they were out of the crowd. "No thanks necessary," replied Fix. "But let us go." "Where?" "To a tailor's." Such a visit was indeed opportune. The clothing of both Mr. Fogg and Fix was in rags, as if they had themselves been actively engaged in the contest between Cammerfield and Mandyboy. An hour after, they were once more suitably attired, and with Aouda returned to the International Hotel. Passepartout was waiting for his master, armed with half a dozen six-barreled revolvers. When he perceived Fix, he knit his brows. But Aouda having, in a few words, told him of their adventure, his countenance resumed its placid expression. Fix evidently was no longer an enemy, but an ally. He was faithfully keeping his word. Dinner over, the coach which was to convey the passengers and their luggage to the station drew up to the door. As he was getting in, Mr. Fogg said to Fix, "Have you not seen this Colonel Proctor again?" "No." "I will come back to America to find him," said Phileas Fogg calmly. It would not be right for an Englishman to permit himself to be treated in that way without retaliating. The detective smiled, but did not reply. It was clear that Mr. Fogg was one of those Englishmen who, while they do not tolerate duelling at home, fight abroad when their honour is attacked. At 6:15, the travellers reached the station and found the train ready to depart. As he was about to enter it, Mr. Fogg called a porter and said to him, "My friend, was there not some trouble today in San Francisco?" "There was a political meeting, sir," replied the porter. "But I thought there was a great deal of disturbance in the streets." "It was only a meeting assembled for an election." "The election of a general-in-chief, no doubt?" asked Mr. Fogg. "No, sir, of a justice of the peace. Phileas Fogg got into the train, which started off at full speed. All right. Oh man, it's funny. Just some of the leftover stuff from. It's definitely a book of its time. I kind of have gone back and forth over the years of kind of updating language and stuff that's a little inappropriate or not what we would use today. But I think as long as it's not done in a unkind way, I think it's good to read what was written and then I think most individuals are smart enough to be able to know like this was written a long time ago and things have changed. So hope you appreciate that style of things. I did catch a typo though. I was absolutely shocked. So John Bunsby is the guy who is the captain of the Tonkadeer. His name is spelled B-U-N-S-B-Y, Bunsby, and every time, except for once, they spelled it John Busby, B-U-S-B-Y. They left out the N. I thought that was hilarious. So I don't know if that's just the copy that I have, or if that's an error that Jules Verne actually did, but I thought that was pretty funny. Only one word here today. Rectilinear. It's moving in or consisting of, bounded by, or characterized by straight line or lines. Rectilinear. I'm not quite sure how, I guess you'd use it to describe something, so you could say a house was rectilinear, if it had a lot of straight lines on it or something, but yeah, probably not the most useful word, but not a bad one to know. Alright, thanks guys for listening today. I really, really do appreciate it. I know I say it all the time, but it is so cool that there are people listening to this podcast from all over the world, and if you are from a different country, it's kind of cool to have people from all over the place listening, especially as we do a book like this where he's bopping into every country, or not every country, but a bunch of countries around the world. So if you are on the route of Phileas Fogg and around the world, I would love to hear from you. Please get in touch. I'd love to visit with reader or listeners, not readers. I'm the reader. You're the listener. I love hearing from listeners, and just makes it more of a conversation instead of me just talking into a microphone and staring at my computer. So please get in touch. I love hearing from listeners, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will catch you back here next week.
Welcome to a new era of baseball's great spectacle. The T-Mobile Home Run Derby, live on Netflix. The biggest sluggers in baseball put their talents to the test on All-Star Weekend. Raw power meets star power. Big swagger meets bigger slams. And you don't swing to make contact. You swing to make history. Watch the T-Mobile Home Run Derby live on Netflix this Monday, July 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific.
At ZocDoc, we know being a healthy adult is like living in a video game. Every day has side quests, taxes, laundry, birthdays. And just when you're leveling up, you have to book a doctor. The insurance portal crashes. They put you on hold. Your doctor doesn't take your plan. Game over. We see you. So we made booking a doctor easy. Download ZocDoc. Search by specialty, insurance, and availability. Book instantly. No cheat codes required. Find a doctor you love with ZocDoc.